It's great to see you all here. I think that, Alan, just wanted to check that what you said about being courteous to your speakers includes me.
Oh.
Right? As long as we have that. And I was really just advised that my time has kind of been cut in half, so I'm going to be trying to do this very quickly. And I'm really happy to kick off this morning's program with a presentation about the history of B'nai B'rith in Israel from the founding of the Jerusalem Lodge in 1888 until the founding of the state in 1948. I assume that this topic was included in the program of this policy conference because along with the 170th anniversary of the founding of B'nai B'rith in New York, the 125th anniversary of B'nai B'rith in Israel is, I would suggest, an equally significant milestone that I hope I will help you to better appreciate in the coming minutes. But before I get into my main topic, I'd like to say a few words about the B'nai B'rith World Center, and this is something that Chaim was going to do, and I know that he is very sad that he couldn't be here with you, so I'll be doing that in his stead. We like to think of the World Center as the hub of B'nai B'rith international activities in Israel, serving for over 30 years as the key link between Israel and B'nai B'rith members and supporters around the world. It's B'nai B'rith's permanent and official presence in Jerusalem and its public affairs arm in Israel. In essence, the World Center is your embassy. Our task is to strengthen Israel-diaspora relations, fortify Israel's sovereignty in Jerusalem, and stay abreast of the constantly changing political, diplomatic, and social landscape. We do this through educational programs and by building relationships with political leaders across the spectrum, with a diplomatic corps, and with leading civic and academic institutions in Israel. Now, just a little bit of history. The establishment of the World Center served as B'nai B'rith's response to the August 1980 UN Security Council Resolution 487 that called on all member states to remove their embassies, their diplomatic missions, from Jerusalem. And indeed, in a step that runs in the face of diplomatic convention, no states today maintain embassies in Jerusalem, the eternal capital of Israel and the Jewish people. The World Center, one of the first representative offices of any major international Jewish organization in Israel, is an ongoing expression of B'nai B'rith's active dedication to the state of Israel and the city of Jerusalem. It is a continuation of B'nai B'rith's commitment to Jewish Renaissance in Eretz Yisrael that began, as I mentioned, in 1888. To advance its goals, the World Center conducts a wide range of activities. Some of these, such as our Award for Journalism and the Jerusalem Address, were mentioned yesterday by the President, and I do not want to repeat them now, but I do want to touch on just a few other significant programs. In recognition to the need to strengthen Jewish solidarity, we initiated and conduct annually a unique ceremony on Holocaust Martyrs and Heroes Remembrance Day, that's Yom HaShoah, in cooperation with the Jewish National Fund, commemorating the heroism of Jews who rescued fellow Jews during the Holocaust. Of the hundreds of ceremonies that take place on Yom HaShoah, this is the only one we are aware of that commemorates Jewish rescuers. Some 800 border police cadets and high school students attend the event that takes place at the B'nai B'rith Martyrs Forest. The event is covered widely in the press. And recently, together with a committee to recognize the heroism of Jews who rescued fellow Jews during the Holocaust, of which I am a member, we now also present a Jewish rescuer citation to Jews who went beyond the call of duty to rescue fellow Jews during the Holocaust. And this year we will be recognizing the heroism of Jonas Eckstein, who rescued Jews in Slovakia, and we're looking forward to the participation of the ambassador of Slovakia and perhaps also the chairman of the Knesset Education Committee, who we've approached. We're also planning on doing a major academic conference that will mark the publication of a 900-page book by Catholic University Press this year on Jewish self-help during the Holocaust. Now, Israel Aid was mentioned yesterday, but I would like to add that the World Center is a founding member of that organization, and we spearheaded the relationship with B'nai B'rith that has evolved over the past decade. B'nai B'rith has helped to fund significant aid projects undertaken by Israel, including the civilian medical mission that is helping save lives now as we speak in the Philippines. The World Center also hosts foreign artists, experts, and scientists on missions to Israel to help inform their attitudes about the country and the conflict. Our most consistent partner in this endeavor has been B'nai B'rith Uruguay with their Fraternidad Award and Light and Truth Award that brings artists and scientists on missions to Israel that we organize. I invite everyone here to develop a platform with us for sending important persons in your community to Israel. There's no better way to confront and dismiss the lies about Israel than a week or 10-day long visit in Israel. The World Center also implements B'nai B'rith international humanitarian projects in Israel, including projects following the Great Carmel Fire and Second Lebanon War, for which we receive grants also from B'nai B'rith Europe. We also administer a B'nai B'rith annual grant to Israeli orphans, which has put me in direct contact with some of the most tragic cases of terrorism and violence in the country. Now, I think I'm going to end this part of my presentation just to mention a partnership that we have, a very important partnership with the Ecumenical Theological Research Fraternity in Israel, which is an umbrella Christian organization. And together we have kind of resurrected a group, an informal Jewish-Christian platform called the Liaison Committee. And that committee is aimed at fostering better mutual respect and understanding between local Jews and Christians. And most recently we held a consultation with 15 foreign Christian clergy and commentators on anti-Israeli attitudes and actions in the mainline Protestant churches, and also a symposium in September on a new trend among young members of our indigenous Christian community to volunteer in the Israeli army. And this is happening in reaction to the so-called Arab Spring that has brought about large-scale persecution of Christians in the Middle East, including in Syria, Egypt, and around the Arab world. And what I'd like to finally do is to mention our latest initiative, and that is the establishment of the B'nai B'rith World Center Award for outstanding support of the State of Israel and the Jewish people. The award will recognize non-Jews who have distinguished themselves in supporting the State of Israel and or the Jewish people in the realm of ideas. And the award will be named for the noted French journalist Émile Zola, who defended Captain Alfred Dreyfus from the trumped-up charges of treason that stemmed from the anti-Semitic hatred of the conspirators, of the true conspirators. And we've put together already a very prominent jury that will be making that award. Now what I'd like to do is to move to the main part of my presentation, which is to speak about B'nai B'rith and Eretz Yisrael, the land of Israel, or Palestine as it was known, in the late 19th and 20th century. What I lack in professional credentials as a historian, I hope to make up with my passion of telling the story of the amazing people who led B'nai B'rith and Eretz Yisrael in those early days. In reading about their exploits, I was taken by their daring, commitment, and dedication to the cause of creating the building blocks of Jewish statehood, and this nearly a decade before the establishment of the Zionist movement by Theodor Herzl in 1897. The story of B'nai B'rith and Eretz Yisrael and the rise of Jewish nationalism are actually one and the same. The turn of the 19th century was a period ripe for change. Stagnation, vulnerability, and the poverty of the Jewish community in Palestine led a small idealistic group of young men to establish the first B'nai B'rith Lodge there in Jerusalem. A proactive movement, the John Lodge promoted the revival of Hebrew as a living vernacular of the growing Jewish community, bridged gaps between the Ashkenazi and Sephardi communities, aided immigrants and impoverished Jews, encouraged settlement of the land, and fought the powerful influence of the many Christian missionary groups that were active at the time. Laying foundations for the cultural, economic, and social rebirth of the Jewish nation, B'nai B'rith, in a very real sense, set the stage upon which the Jewish state was to evolve. Their story is one of dogged determination to form a community of activists who would drive a movement toward Jewish revival in the land of Israel, supported by B'nai B'rith members in the U.S. and other countries. Through the activities of the pioneer Jerusalem Lodge, Jewish children and adults were exposed for the first time to Hebrew education. The first libraries were established. Missionary activity was fought. Hospitals were founded. Settlements were established. Barriers between the divergent Jewish sects were overcome. Lodges were formed in Israel and throughout the Levant, and Aliyah was encouraged from neighboring countries. Although it is difficult to determine the cumulative effect of these activities that they had on the establishment of the state years later, their significance should not be underestimated. The Jewish community in the country at the twilight of the Ottoman Empire, which numbered only about 50,000, was controlled by the feuding leaders of yeshiva communities whose sole means of support was philanthropy from abroad, known as chalukah. The B'nai B'rith leaders sought to create a new community, one in which members would help themselves while helping others, and one that would strive toward rapprochement between the existing factions within the community. Now, before I delve a bit deeper into the cultural and religious environment that existed then, and the specific initiatives undertaken by the Jerusalem Lodge, I want to mention that these very deep roots that I've been talking about affect my job on a daily basis. And maybe I'll just raise two very quick examples of how we're affected and that this history still really had this effect. I was, in August, I participated in an unveiling of a tombstone in Zichron Yaakov on the grave of David Salata. And Zichron Yaakov, as you know, is one of the very early settlements that were established in the modern era in Israel. And the tombstone was placed by his only surviving child, Aviva, who's now 75 years old, in a moving ceremony with the participation of family members, friends, and the chief rabbi. Jason, I don't know if you can find those photos of the tombstone. David Salata was a mandatory policeman, and he died of a sudden heart attack in 1946. And after he died, the family that was destitute broke up, and the two sons were sent to orphanage, and the daughter stayed with her mother. Aviva stayed with her mother for a while, and then she died suddenly as well. And Aviva left Zichron Yaakov and lived in a number of foster homes and orphanages, and she lost all contact with Zichron Yaakov. Now, Dan Mariashin had asked me, probably now 2 years ago, to go to Zichron, to go to the historic archives, and to have a look at the B'nai B'rith files, because we knew that there was a lodge in Zichron established in 1911, and Dan knew that there were files, or someone had mentioned to Dan, and he asked me to go up, and I procrastinated about that for a long time, but now it seems as though there was a reason for that procrastination. Because when I was there, the director of the museum, of the archive, gave me a box, and I started going through these old handwritten documents going back to 1911, correspondence also with the Grand Lodge in Cincinnati at the time, and in Constantinople. And I happened upon a passage that seemed to really epitomize the activities of B'nai B'rith. And maybe I'll just find that and read that. It was an entry from January 4th, 1947. I read it, and I handed it to the director of the archive, and she turned white. And it said, the second, I'm quoting, the second action of the lodge was for the benefit of the family of the policeman Salata, that includes a widow, 2 boys, and a girl that were left destitute after the father's death. We succeeded in placing the 2 boys in Ramat Gan in a social institution, which is, according to the town social worker, the best institution. The cost of 8 Palestine pounds per month for the boys, is a significant discount due to the fact that the director of the institution, Dr. Rafailovich, is also a B'nai B'rith brother. This did not necessitate actual outlay of large funds, and in the future, the affairs of the family will be handled by the town council's social committee, nearly all members of B'nai B'rith, I mentioned, and they end by saying the wife is now more tranquil and she's now working in the winery. And but the director turned white because it was just a week before that Aviva showed up unannounced in the archive asking to find her father's grave. And in fact, they were able to find what you see here are just the two letters that remain of Samach and Tet. All they were able to put actually when he died, because the security situation, because the family was destitute, was a slab of concrete. And now, after finding this, she came back, Aviva, and they added the top and bottom part of the grave, and we presented her with a copy of this protocol that added another piece in her own history that she really had no idea about, and it was very moving to be there when the ceremony took place. Just another quick example of how things come up from still back from those times. Following the devastating Carmel fire in December 2010, B'nai B'rith, as you know, raised money, and I was proud that the World Center was charged with implementing the projects in that respect. And we undertook a number of programs in cooperation with the Haifa fire station and with JNF. And we also undertook to undertake a project with the Israel Parks Authority at the mandatory period historical site on the edges of the forest. This was a mandatory period prison. And it was the site is now named for Moshe Lazarovich, who also, like Salata, was a mandatory period policeman. And he was kidnapped by Bedouin marauders, along with his wife and brother-in-law and 3 small children in 1938 from that base. The Arabs murdered the 3 adults and released the 3 children, not before they tried to rape the 12-year-old girl. And when I was taken to inspect the site by representatives of the National Parks Authority, the last surviving child of Moshe Lazarovich, Yifrach, who was 8 at the time and is now over 80, was on hand. And he was proud to show me evidence that his father was a member of B'nai B'rith in Tiberias. And since then until now, I've been fighting typical bureaucracy to try to get the rehabilitation plan for this site off the ground. And I think it bears mentioning here in this audience that Yifrach's younger brother, Chagai, who was 2 at the time of the kidnapping, was killed in the Italian Air Force attack on Tel Aviv in 1940, along with 136 other Jews. So what better thing to do than to rededicate this park for Moshe Lazarovich and his family. I hope we can do that in the near future. Now I'd like to get back, this is Yifrach Lazarovich at a second visit that we made to the site. He's actually standing, if you can see, on what remains of the house that his family lived in. There was a British officer, Arab officer, and Jewish officer at that prison, which is actually like a work camp, and that's the foundation of the wooden home that the Lazarovich family lived in and that they were kidnapped from. Now I'd like to go back to what I started speaking about, the Jerusalem Lodge. At the end of the 19th century, fundamental changes took place simultaneously within the Jewish communities in Palestine and Eastern Europe. Waves of anti-Semitism were breaking out throughout Europe, and tens of thousands of Jews took flight, immigrating to the United States, Great Britain, and elsewhere. Others took part in revolutionary movements in their native countries. A much smaller group of European Jews preferring to reaffirm their Jewish identity in a secular and nationalist form found themselves attracted to the emerging Zionist study circles and clubs. Members of these groups, known as Chovevei Zion, lovers of Zion, believe that there is no salvation for the people of Israel unless they establish a government of their own in the land of Israel. The Jewish population in Eretz Yisrael, numbering a scant 17,000 in the mid-19th century and 24,000 by 1882, more than doubled by the turn of the century, with 25,000 Jews entering Palestine during the 1880s and 1890s. This became known as the first Aliyah, or the first wave of immigration to Israel in the modern era. And it changed the cultural and religious landscape of the country, ending a period of impending atrophy and paving the way for Jewish national renaissance. These settlers, mostly from Russia and Poland, were young, educated, and idealistic. They were doctors, philosophers, teachers, and tradesmen. They arrived in the Promised Land to begin their lives anew. To further the cultural and national interests of the new Yishuv, there was a desire among many of these enlightened Jewish young men to organize under one organization, and that organization was B'nai B'rith. In the spring of 1888, a quorum of 10 men who envisioned the redemption from the depths and from neglect. I'm quoting here from Yeshayahu Press, an early member of the lodge. They established the B'nai B'rith's first lodge in Palestine, lodge number 379, named simply Yerushalayim. The founders were William Zev Herzberg, a German-born philosopher, author of a book in German defending the Jewish religion, and the principal of the first orphanage in Eretz Yisrael that offered secular education. Eliezer ben Yehuda, who you can see here on the right, the father of modern Hebrew, David Yelin in the center there with the tarbush on his head. Eliezer ben Yehuda, David Yelin, a Hebraeus and founder of the Hebrew Teachers Seminary and community representative who went on to become district president. Ephraim Cohen, a local representative of Ezra Educational Fund. Avraham Moshe Luntz, founder of the first director of the School for the Blind and a leading geographer of Eretz Yisrael. Yosef Miuchas, president of the Council of Jerusalem Jews and a scion of the Sephardic community. And those who joined shortly afterwards, including Shimon Rokach, head of the Ashkenazi community in Jaffa, and a member of the Yeshuv's political council, Yechiel Michael Pines, Secretary General of the Chovevei Zion Executive, and Mayor Dizengoff, one of the founders of Tel Aviv and its first mayor. And indeed, something that we know in that respect is that most of the founders of Tel Aviv were members of the lodge in Jaffa, and I'll speak more about that later. But we don't have the protocol of the meeting or any meetings where that was actually discussed, the founding of Tel Aviv, the first Jewish city in the modern era, where that was actually discussed in the lodge meetings. And we continue to look for any evidence of that. But we have reason to believe that the idea to establish a Jewish city came about from those meetings of the lodge in Jaffa. And it was Zygmunt Semmel, a leader of B'nai B'rith in Germany, who planted the idea of establishing a B'nai B'rith lodge with Herzberg during a visit to Jerusalem in 1887 after attending the inauguration of the Ben Maimon Lodge in Cairo. And it was Oscar Strauss, a long-serving American consul in Constantinople, who on a visit to Jerusalem in 1888 provided the immediate catalyst for the establishment of the lodge. At the lodge's first meeting, Herzberg, who was elected the body's first president, spoke of uniting the Jews in Israel under the B'nai B'rith mantle, uniting the people to improve the state of the Yishuv, while acting as a bridge between Eretz Yisrael and the B'nai B'rith lodges throughout the world, became the Young Lodge's raison d'etre. In 1889, the Jerusalem Lodge received formal recognition from the B'nai B'rith order in New York, which called upon it to establish other lodges in the Holy Land. And under the aegis of the Jerusalem Lodge, the Shar Tzion Lodge was established in Jaffa in 1890, to be followed by the Galilee Lodge in Tzfat and Safed in 1891, and the Adolf Krauss Lodge in Zichron Yaakov in 1911, which I mentioned earlier. The towering figures who undertook this task became legends in their own time for their work within the B'nai B'rith framework and other civic projects that they undertook. Now, one of the most striking aspects of the movement was the founders' wish to popularize the notion of Jewish nationalism. On the occasion of the Jerusalem Lodge's 40th anniversary in 1928, David Yelin reminisced, and I quote, "What was the essence of the founding of the Lodge? To create a union of forces which seeks to move society towards joint efforts. And to this was added a second purpose from the day the Lodge was founded, to endeavor with its great association, B'nai B'rith, which counts its members in the tens of thousands from among the best active forces in the world, to know the concept of Jewish nationalism and to recognize it. And this more than 10 years before Zionism was born. From the outset, the common opinion within the Lodge was that in order to create a strong force in Eretz Yisrael, assistance must be secured from all the energetic forces in other cities in Eretz Yisrael. And on the other hand, one of its main goals must be to penetrate large communities in the ancient world and imbue them with a new spirit, a spirit of our national rebirth. This was the true winning over of the communities that Herzl dreamt about," end quote. And what he was referring to at the time, David Yelin, was the fact that members of the Lodge went on secret missions, clandestine missions, throughout the Levant and established B'nai B'rith lodges in Beirut, Damascus, Alexandria, Izmir, Constantinople, because remember, this was the Ottoman Empire, and they recognized that they needed Jews in all of those places in order to support the notion of the revival of Jewish nationalism in the land of Israel. And they were wise in the ways of old world diplomacy and responded quickly to developments. And I mentioned that they established these lodges, and through them they petitioned the Sultan to allow Jews to purchase property in Israel and also to allow Aliyah. And they were successful, at least in part, in doing that. Now, in the scheme of national rebirth, Jerusalem held a special place in the hearts and minds of the founders. They spared no effort to strengthen Jerusalem as the capital of the Jewish people. And as we celebrate Israel's 65th anniversary in a united Jerusalem under Jewish sovereignty, it is fitting to hear how both Yelin and Yuchas reminisced about their attitudes toward the city. Speaking about the establishment of the rural settlement of Moza by the Jerusalem Lodge, Yelin wrote, quote, "How great was the celebration of the founding of Moza by three young farmers, the Chalutzim, the pioneers of those days, when all the brothers of the lodge and their families traveled to the celebrations." That's not the photo, but we'll see it soon. Traveled to the celebrations of the founding of the first settlement near Jerusalem. And there was a principle in this step. At that time, when Jerusalem was completely neglected by the baron's clerks, so you're referring to Baron Hirsch, in regard to agricultural settlement, the lodge sought to begin in earnest agricultural settlement near the capital of Eretz Yisrael in order to be an example for others, end quote. I'm not sure where the photo is of Moza. Can we? No. All right. We'll find it. That's the end. Go back, if you could, to the. Well, this purchase of the land in Moza actually started before B'nai B'rith was established. The land there was purchased from an Effendi by David Yelin's grandfather, also named David Yelin. But by the time he became president of B'nai B'rith, the lodge purchased the land from the family and also enlarged the holding so that they could establish, but as I mentioned, the first agricultural settlement, Jewish agricultural settlement in the modern era. And in fact, when Theodor Herzl made his only visit to Israel in in 1898, a year after establishing the World Zionist Organization. He was brought to Moza. He was brought there to see that Jews were able to settle in the land. He was not used to seeing that in his native Budapest or in Vienna. And here he was encouraged by seeing Jews settling the land and engaging in agriculture, and this encouraged him very much in his activities. And in fact, he planted a tree, which is the only thing that Theodor Herzl left in Jerusalem. He planted a tree in Moza. Eventually, in the 1920s, throughout the beginning of the century, that tree served as a magnet for Zionist activity, but unfortunately it was burned down in the 1920s. We don't know by whom. And the stump remains, actually is protected in a case, but the Zionist mythology has it that the trunk of that tree made its way to Tel Aviv, and it was on that trunk that the flag of the new state of Israel was hoisted in 1948 when David Ben-Gurion announced the establishment of the state of Israel. That's part of mythology, part of Zionist and B'nai B'rith mythology, and something that we're very proud of. As long as time allows me, I'd like to speak about one very important part of B'nai B'rith activity in the early years, and we'll leave that photo on because it's the issue of Hebrew. And as I mentioned, Eliezer Ben Yehuda was a member of the lodge, and he became its first secretary. And he called the lodge, quote, a center of visions. And it became the unofficial cultural center of the new yeshuv, believing that Jewish national renaissance was conceivable only if it was consciously rooted in Hebrew. The Jerusalem Lodge became the first public body in Palestine in which Hebrew was the official language. Its minutes were written in Hebrew, and it was declared the preferred language, although everyone had the right to speak his own the language of his choice. And in fact, the first president, Herzberg, did not speak Hebrew, and he spoke in German and was translated. B'nai B'rith's impact on the revival of Hebrew went well beyond the lodge meetings. In 1889, a number of young lodge members established Safa Brura, the first organization aimed at spreading the Hebrew language and speech among people in all walks of life. The Jerusalem Lodge pledged to strive its utmost to revive the language and support the organization at all times according to our ability. A year later, the group founded and elected the Vad HaLashon HaIvrit, the Hebrew Language Committee, which is the precursor of the Academy of Hebrew Languages, which to this day is the supreme authority on the Hebrew language. The committee, made up of Ben Yehuda, Yelin, Rabbi Chaim Hirschensohn, and Luntz, devoted itself to determining the Hebrew vocabulary needed for daily use and creating, out of the Babel-like variations, a uniform pronunciation for Hebrew speech. Now, another B'nai B'rith initiative in this line, and this is the photo that you see here, was the establishment of the first Hebrew-speaking kindergarten in Jerusalem. And this is shortly after there were Hebrew kindergartens opened in Rishon LeZion in 1898, and another in Jaffa in 1902. The B'nai B'rith kindergarten opened in 1903 in a rented house on B'nai B'rith Street. And it was immediately filled to capacity with 70 children, both Ashkenazi and Sephardi. And the reaction from the ultra-Orthodox world was swift and negative. The rabbinical authorities had already forbidden the study of science and foreign languages, and they viewed the kindergarten with the same contempt. The rabbis posted warnings throughout the city that the kindergarten would lead Jewish children astray down the path of corruption and ruin. David Yelin, one of the kindergarten founders, responded to the attacks in writing, expounding on the goals and activities of the new facility. Providing child care for mothers who had to work, the kindergarten prevented youngsters from roaming the streets and offered them an environment beyond the squalor of their homes. Yellen stressed that the children were taught the daily prayers, so that they will understand what is taught to them at home and the elements of reading while only hearing the strains of their sacred tongue. The kindergarten was an educational experiment and set the tone for future Hebrew education in the country. B'nai B'rith subsequently opened a seminary for kindergarten teachers in Jerusalem, and the lodges in Jaffa, Tzfat, Tiberias, Rehovot, Haifa, and Beirut followed the Jerusalem example and opened Hebrew-speaking kindergartens. So as the language wars were being fought at the university levels, and we know about those language wars in the Technion between German and Hebrew, the battle for Hebrew was being won with a new generation as scores of youngsters learned to speak what was destined to become the national tongue of Israel. And I just want to mention very quickly, Jason, if you could find the photo, I think it's the next one, this building. This building that sits today on B'nai B'rith Street in Jerusalem is the Midrash Abravanel Library, established in 1892 as the city's first free public library. And it became the nucleus of what was to become the Jewish National Library, the Jewish National and University Library today at the Hebrew University. The creation of a public library had strong ideological underpinnings. While religious academies and Christian missions had their own libraries, the few prior attempts to open public, non-denominational libraries had ended in dismal failure. More than 10 years earlier, the Montefiore Library had closed due to pressure from ultra-Orthodox circles, as had a library established by Eliezer ben Yehuda himself. Despite threats of excommunication, members of the Jerusalem Lodge were intent upon widening the cultural and intellectual horizons. Created 400 years after the expulsion of Jews from Spain, the library was named, in a nod to the Sephardic community, the Don Isaac Abravanel Library. Abravanel was a very well-known rabbi, lived from 1437 to 1508, and he was among the first Jewish scholars to be familiar with the concept of humanism and the world of the Renaissance. The B'nai B'rith members went from door to door to solicit books to fill the library shelves, and Ben Yehuda's donation of his shutdown library of 2,000 books, 30% of which were secular, were donated to the library. In 1895, the library's collection made a leap when a Zionist physician, Dr. Yosef Chazanovich, transferred his collection of 10,000 volumes from Bialystok to Jerusalem. He was a collector of rare and ancient manuscripts and urged other Jews to donate their books as well. And he wrote, "In our holy city, Jerusalem, all the books written in Hebrew and all the books in all languages which deal with Jews and their Torah will be treasured." In 1899, Theodor Herzl, in the name of the Zionist Congress, sent Chazanovich a 300 ruble donation for the library. In his letter, Herzl wrote that the money should be, quote, used for the good of the endeavor that is so close to your heart. The library became known as the Midrash Abravanel and Ginzei Yosef, named for Yosef Chazanovich, and he was actually the first non-resident who was granted a membership in the Jerusalem Lodge. And in fact, as a way of maintaining contact with Jewish communities in the diaspora, it became the Lodge's policy to grant honorary membership to Jews, mostly from Russia and Poland, whose hometown did not have a B'nai B'rith Lodge. Just another example, one other person who received this kind of membership was Leib Goldberg of Vilna, who later founded Haaretz daily newspaper, and he was a big supporter of the Hebrew Language Committee. The library was initially housed in a two-room rented apartment on Jaffa Street, and in 1894, B'nai B'rith members began collecting funds, mostly from abroad to build a permanent library structure. And in 1900, the cornerstone of this building was laid, and 2 years later, the books were transferred to what was then a spacious two-story structure named Beit Naaman, and on what would eventually be B'nai B'rith Street. And if you went today to B'nai B'rith Street, You saw some of the photos of Alan and Dan when we visited recently. You really, it would be hard to recognize because there was, here's a photo. That's the same building in the background. But now, of course, everything is built up all the way in between. But if you go back, Jason, for a second, the other photo, you can see how there's absolutely nothing in the background. You can see all the way into the Judean desert from where that building stands, and it still stands there. Today, it's still owned actually by the Jerusalem Lodge, but is rented out to a yeshiva. This area is very Orthodox Haredi, in fact, and but you can see the sign on the you can see a sign there on the building, the B'nai B'rith Library. And one other initiative that I'd like to mention is that the B'nai B'rith Lodge in Jaffa, that, as I mentioned, had been established by the Jerusalem Lodge very early on. They conducted the first all-communal elections for a joint city council made up of Ashkenazi, Sephardi, and North African immigrants. And in an attempt to combat Christian missionaries who were very active in Jaffa at the time, B'nai B'rith, together with the town committee, established the Shar Tzion Hospital in 1890. With up to 40 beds, the town and the town's other 3 other hospitals, all run by missionaries, had only half of that number. The hospital provided medical services, including a free eye clinic to Jews throughout the coastal plain. As immigrants poured into the Yeshua's port town, Jaffa, epidemics, especially cholera, were among the hospital's chief concerns. Maintaining the hospital was no easy matter. It was forced to shut down for several months during the year due to financial problems, and patients were referred to what they call the hospital of insiders, where they had, quote, the pleasure of listening all day to the preaching and prayers of the saints of Christianity. Thus, in a letter to the Jerusalem Lodge, Shar Tzion's secretary described how missionaries lured patients by opening an eye clinic next to the hospital on the days when the Shar Tzion eye clinic was closed. We raised funds and now have a doctor on the premises daily, they said. In the end, the missionary clinic was forced to close its doors. But in the United States and the Yeshuv, creating public libraries and cultural centers was B'nai B'rith's primary concern. And in 1892, the organization established the Shar Tzion Library in Jaffa. And this was 2 years actually before the library in Jerusalem was founded. Now this library, I know I have to wind up, the collection from that library was eventually moved to the Beit Ariella library in Tel Aviv today. I don't know how many of you are familiar with it. It sits right by Tel Aviv, the Tel Aviv Museum and the law courts in Tel Aviv, and it's the largest library in all of Israel today, and that's where the core of that collection resides. There are many other initiatives that were undertaken by B'nai B'rith in the early years of the state, but I think what I've been able to give you is a sense of really the fantastic initiatives of these people. And perhaps I'll end with this photo. This is a photo of Morris Bisgeier, Harry Truman, obviously, and Eddie Jacobson, who's a member of B'nai B'rith, and who made Frank Goldman, and these gentlemen made a tremendous contribution to the establishment, the formal establishment of the State of Israel. I don't know how many of you know the story. It's been told and retold many times how President, before he was President, Chaim Weizmann, he was the president of the Zionist organization, came to New York and was in 1947 when he heard that the United States was going to retract from its support for the partition plan. The partition plan had already been passed in November 1947, but the State Department was pressing Truman to pull back American support from partition, which meant the establishment of a Jewish state and an Arab state under the UN partition plan. And the Zionists knew that if this happened, if the partition would be canceled, that would be probably the end of the ability to establish an independent Jewish state. Weizmann traveled to New York and was unable to get an audience with Truman. A chance meeting, though, with B'nai B'rith leadership in the Waldorf Astoria in New York led them to call on Eddie Jacobson, who was a member of B'nai B'rith, had not been a Zionist, but we all know was very, very close to Truman because they served together in World War I. Truman was his officer, and they then went on to establish a haberdashery in Kansas City together. And when there were debts, probably during the Depression, and they had to close the store, and Truman went into politics, he left Eddie Jacobson to clean up and the debts of that haberdashery, and that left him also with a very positive view about Jews. That he once said this. He knew that the Jews paid their debts, and when the president of B'nai B'rith called on Eddie Jacobson urgently to come to Washington, see the president, and ask him for a meeting for Dr. Weizmann, Eddie Jacobson did that. He came to Washington. He had a free entry into the Oval Office, and he walked in, and he, as it's told, he told the president, that I've never asked you for anything, but I'm asking you now to meet with Chaim Weizmann. And Truman was furious. He said, I won't meet them. The Zionists have been criticizing me because we're probably going to pull back from the partition plan, and I won't see him. As it's told, Jacobson turned to leave, and he noticed a small statue of Truman's hero, former President Andrew Jackson, on the table. And he said to Truman, you have your hero, and it's Andrew Jackson, and my hero is Chaim Weizmann. I'm asking you one last time to see Dr. Weizmann. And he used some curse language that I think is being recorded, so I won't repeat it. But the president said, "All right, you whatever it is, I'll see him." And there's a whole elaborate scheme of bringing Weizmann from New York to Washington. The rooms for Weizmann and his aides were taken out under the names of the B'nai B'rith president, of Frank Goldman and Morris Bisgeier, so that it would not be known that they had come to Washington. He was ushered in the back entrance. He had his meeting with Truman, and Truman agreed to stick with partition. And the rest is history, and as they say. And in fact, when I bring any visitors to the Israeli Foreign Ministry, I try to take them down to a place which is a little hard to get to. It's behind a locked door. Not a lot of people know about it, but in one of the vitrines in the Israeli Foreign Ministry is the pen that was used by President Truman to sign the Jure recognition of the State of Israel. And this is what this picture is from. This is when President Truman signed the Jure recognition of the State of Israel with only the leadership of B'nai B'rith and Eddie Jacobson there. He gave the pen to B'nai B'rith, to the leadership of B'nai B'rith, and eventually that pen was presented to the ambassador of Israel in the United States, Eliyahu Eilat, and in a beautiful box, and that was and Eilat transferred that pen to the Israeli Foreign Ministry, where it's displayed constantly, displayed all the time for visitors to the Foreign Ministry to see. When you're in Jerusalem next, please tell me. I'd like to take you to see that pen. Thank you all very much.